We're joined today by Gary Lane, Senior International Correspondent for CBN News. How you doing, Gary?
I'm doing great today. End of the week. Always good on Friday.
Always good on Friday. Well, we've got a lot to talk about. Obviously, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, a lot of eyes are on this. And one of the issues that sort of stemmed out of it is curiosity about China. What is China going to do? Are they watching this? Are they, aligning with Russia in any way? They abstained from the UN, vote on this. And so what can you tell us about that relationship between China and Russia?
Well, it's a growing relationship, and I think it began more out of economic necessity. China, as you know, as they're expanding their industries throughout China, they need gas and oil. And who has it but their next door neighbor, Russia. So they reached a number of agreements on oil and gas pipelines, one of them late last year as well. And so this relationship has been growing, it's been solidifying and strengthening. And now we find out, right, you guys reported this as well, that the Chinese had asked Putin to delay his invasion of Ukraine until after the Olympics, which he did. He acquiesced and he agreed to do that. He obliged with that request, and he invaded 4 days after the end of the Olympics. On the 24th of February was the full invasion at that time. The Olympics, I think, ended on the 20th. But, the Chinese, they didn't want any distractions. They wanted to have the center stage of the world, and they had it until Ukraine.
Gary, a lot of people will look at this, they'll see what's happening in Ukraine, and they'll maybe see what's happening in China, but they won't put the pieces together because there's a lot going on. It's a complex issue. But I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the potential shift here, if this could be creating a new axis of power against the United States.
Well, it is, and it isn't just militarily, it's also economically, technologically. Of course, one of the keys of the whole Ukraine invasion, not only the oil and gas pipelines that are going through there from Russia into Eastern Europe and Western Europe, but also think about the ports. For a long time, the Russians have wanted control of those ports along the Black Sea. And once they get Odessa, that will pretty much be complete. They'll be choking off Ukraine. Ukraine will not have any sea access to markets. They'll have to do everything by rail through Western Europe. And the Russians will have these very prosperous and lucrative ports that will give them access that they've always wanted directly into the Black Sea and through the Bosphorus Straits and out into the Mediterranean. So that's very strategic and very key. And of course, that's another way to get oil to China. To ship oil to China rather than going by rail, they can do it, and pipelines and so forth. They can actually ship oil. So this is an alliance that is economic, but also technological, because I talked to General Robert Spalding. He's retired from the U.S. Air Force, but his job now at the Hudson Institute is to head up their efforts, oversee their efforts, national security efforts involving the Asia-Pacific region and China. And he's an expert in this. And he said, look, they very well could be getting ready to move on Taiwan, China keeping a close eye on the world reaction in Ukraine to decide when and if they will make a move on Taiwan.
Gary, this is an unprecedented time because there's so much more technology now than there was, even 20 years ago when the invasion of Iraq happened and those wars were going on. What can the West do right now as we're seeing this new axis of evil emerge with, Russia and China and Iran? And we can talk about them in a minute as well. But what is the West doing, and what can they do? Because I don't think anybody wants a bunch of boots on the ground against Russia and China and don't want to spark that off. But it seems like we've got to do something.
Well, I think we have to look at future warfare. Number one, we're far behind on the development of hypersonic technology, which the Chinese have already tested, a hypersonic missile. That raised alarm bells here. That's one thing that we can do militarily. Also, cyber. We're way behind in cyber and artificial intelligence. You talk to any expert in that area, and they'll tell you, look, we're miles behind in artificial intelligence, and it's actually American companies that are helping the Chinese develop this. Read Peter Schweizer's book on China that is still number one. atop the New York bestsellers list. It has been, I think, for about 4 weeks now. But Schweitzer talks about this as well. If they make a move on Taiwan, they'll control the semiconductor industry. Taiwan has about 60% of the global revenue for microchips and semiconductors. Imagine that if China controlled that. And I'm sure their eyes are on that. Russia would like a piece of that pie. I'm sure North Korea and Iran would as well.
One of the things, as you're talking about all of this, the question that comes to mind is, and I don't know if the answer is yes or no, it sounds like maybe we're not fully aware or ready as a country, but you look at the Biden administration and the report that we were giving intelligence to the Chinese about the Russians and about Ukraine before the invasion. These are all allegations, but we were giving it to them, and they in turn then presented the Chinese, to the Russians. If that is true, what does it say about our understanding, as a country of this relationship that is growing there?
Well, it says that we haven't realized that we have entered into a new Cold War. We still think we have this friendship with China when really we're adversaries, maybe even potentially enemies at this point. We're definitely adversaries, but they have blinders on their eyes. They're not seeing what is really happening. That China will very soon dominate the world. With Russia's help, with North Korea's help, with Iran, this new axis of evil that is forming, that is coalescing. But if you talk to people like retired Brigadier General Robert Spalding, they'll tell you, look, we've been doing this. We're the ones that they would not have been able to do this if it had not been for us. We've been doing this for 50 years at least. It started with 50 years ago last month when Nixon and Kissinger opened the door to China, and American companies and even our government rushed in to get in on that huge market of over 1 billion people. And we've been helping them, aiding and abetting them ever since. And the latest is AI, artificial intelligence technology. Microsoft is involved in that, and other companies. So, look, we've built this monster, and it seems like we always do this. Didn't we do that with Saddam Hussein? Think of the Iraq War. We armed him to the teeth so he could challenge Iran during their 8-year war, the Iran-Iraq War. And then afterwards we went, we've created a monster. Now what do we do? Well, we had to go to war and beat him back. But look, it's a realization of what is happening on the ground around the world in business, technology, economics. They're trying to dominate the world. They have not changed. They have not changed that. That's been the communist goal ever since the inception.
Gary, you mentioned now a few times the technological issue, and I think a lot of times it's easy to think abstractly about these things, but it will have real world effects on us. So we're already seeing that, for example, with the price of oil, with the Russian-Ukraine invasion, but potentially with China and invading Taiwan. An interesting piece of your report and your conversation with General Spalding was the semiconductors in Taiwan and the impact that could have on the United States. Can you talk to us a little bit about your reporting on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I had said earlier, Taiwan has about 60% of the semiconductor microchip industry around the world, the revenue anyway from that. And look, what Spalding said is, look, if there is a war over Taiwan, I asked him, I said, well, how would the U.S. respond to that? He said, well, he thought it would probably be more of a Berlin airlift type of situation where the U.S. and its allies, Japan, South Korea, so forth, would be dropping supplies in to help the people because basically there would be a threat of nuclear war there. Remember, North Korea and its ally, China's ally, and then China also, they all have nukes. And so there would be a threat of nuclear war. So he doesn't think that there would be American boots on the ground there. We're not obligated by treaty to invade Taiwan militarily or to defend Taiwan militarily. There is no such treaty. But look, one thing that we would have to do, according to Spalding, is get the people in the semiconductor industry, the scientists, the engineers, others, out of Taiwan. And right now, he said a good thing that is happening is some of the semiconductor industry is moving to Arizona. So USA, made in the USA. That's another thing that we can do to counter that threat. But look, We use these semiconductors and microchips in our F-35 jets, in many of our military equipment, missile technology, so forth. We need semiconductors, microchips. 60% are made in Taiwan.
Yeah, and I'm not a technology expert, but it just seems like when China's controlling all that, not only just access to it, but then once they do send them out, what are they doing with them? And can they track us better, or are there things that they can do technologically that would, give them potential to take control over certain things and infrastructure when we're using all of their chips? So there's a lot at play there. But Gary, I wanted to ask you, what is the end game in all this? We see Putin go in. We see him. He has to know, despite his propaganda, that this is not popular around the world. He's obviously calculated this and decided he's going to go in. What is he hoping to get at the end of this, and what can we expect to see play out over the next couple of weeks?
Look, Dan, it's all about money. And I told Gordon this several weeks ago, I think back in late January, early February on the 700 Club. He said, well, what's the goal here? I said, look, it's all about money. Controlling these ports, having access, easy and cheap access to markets around the world, also controlling the oil supply. And here's the astonishing thing. The U.S. is still purchasing Russian oil. In the middle of this war, we're still buying oil from Russia. Why don't we open up the spigots here? Why did we turn those off? Open those up. That's one thing that we can do. Another thing that we can do is to continue to act multilaterally, not unilaterally. There's strength in numbers. And with our NATO and European allies and others around the world, we've seen the vote at the UN. Okay, for now, that's just a vote. But there's overwhelming opposition to what Russia is doing in Ukraine. We need to coalesce an alliance of our own against Russia and China and this new axis of evil that they are forming. So those are some things that we can do, Dan.
Gary, thank you so much for joining us today to break down these stories.
Sure, we're glad to keep those going.
And everyone watching, make sure you stay tuned to CBN News and also to FaithWire for more on these important stories.